And I just realized I was muted. Sorry, guys. Hi, this is NJ. Welcome to Boss Radio Live. And I was talking, which you couldn't hear, about my guest that I have today. Really a great topic that we're going to be talking about. Today we have Danielle Bernock here with us, and we're going to get into it right after this. It's going to be a great show, guys. Share the episode. Share the episode, everyone. It's Boss Radio Live with NJ, your three-dimensional podcast. Baltimore, Maryland. I love my city. Wow. You have to have balance.
Mother's Day extravaganza event being held by LUC Lois Butler Colbert.
Come meet me today at the Spirit Center. I want to hear what you have to say. Again, welcome to Boss Radio Live, where he is the boss of me. So, as I was saying, we have Danielle Bernock here with us today. She is an author, she's a speaker, she is a coach, and she's the founder of Victorious Souls. And we'll find out more about that in a moment. But in case you guys have never heard of Danielle, here is a little about her. Known as the lady on the internet who loves you, Danielle Bernock is a trauma survivor, author, speaker, trauma-informed self-love coach, and owner of Victorious Souls. She helps men, women, and organizations chart a path to their promise. She has created courses and workshops to implement her 4-step proven process called SELF. Her mantra is love yourself, from survive to thrive. Danielle was in her 50s when she wrote and published her first book and really started to thrive in life. She addresses both childhood and adult trauma and how it can silently wreak havoc in every area of a person's life. Danielle promotes inner healing and personal freedom through the power of love, using all forms of media, beginning with her first book. Danielle's greatest passion lies in helping men and women 50 and over live a courageous, victorious, and vibrant life. So please, everyone, welcome to the show, Danielle Bernock. Hi,
Hello.
Danielle. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you, Nichelle?
I'm good. I'm good. Well, thank you for tipping me off that I was still muted. Appreciate that. So I want to hop right into this because I really love talking about trauma. Not that it's a great thing. I know that probably sounds weird, but yeah, not that it's a great thing, but that it is a topic that really needs to be talked about.
True.
And one of the reasons why is because I really think people don't even realize they're traumatized. And I was literally like the last 3 guests, well, you're the third, that I've had have been hitting on trauma in some way. And I love it because I think it is a topic that we need to talk about. So let's hop right into it and kind of get talking about it. So from your perspective, what is trauma?
What is trauma? Trauma is the wound that's left behind in your body, in your brain, in your emotions, in your spirit, when you have gone through something you have been incapable of processing. It's not an incident. It's not a catastrophe. It's what happens to you. Trauma is personal. There's people out there with the big T and the little t of trauma. And I understand that for explanation purposes, but I also have trouble with it because it creates a comparison which would elevate one to be worse than another, one better than another, and then people have such a hard time owning the truth that they have trauma in their life to start with. So if you go, oh, it's a little t, then they go, okay, it's not trauma, and then just
Mm.
push it out of their life and not deal with it.
Yeah, that's very important because, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as far as what can happen when you don't deal with it right. So you yourself, you've had a personal, experience with trauma, and I think a lot of us have. How did you overcome that?
Long, messy road
Mm,
because it wasn't just one, it was multiple kinds of trauma over a period of time. So I developed something called CPTSD, which not all psychologists recognize that, but people who have it do. And even Bessel van der Kolk with The Body Keeps the Score, he recognizes it. And he's the one who actually tipped me off that it's not in that big fancy psychological book named as a thing. But I've
mm,
learned that it doesn't even have to have that label for you to heal of it. It makes it easier because it helps you identify things, but it isn't required. But for those who don't know what CPTSD is,
yeah.
the C stands for complex. And many people are familiar with PTSD, which is post traumatic stress disorder. And there are those out there which I've heard, and I would hope that they would be successful at changing that to PTSI, post traumatic stress injury,
Mm,
instead of disorder. Because disorder makes it sound like, it's pathological and there's something, it just sounds so negative. And people have a hard time owning trauma as it is. You call it a disorder and they feel like, they're, it's like they're
mm,
messed up. And it makes it worse. But if you call it an injury, people go to the doctor if they have an injury. They're quick to deal with it if it's called an injury. And it really is an injury in the brain and the soul and the spirit and different aspects of how it affects a person, how pervasive it is in its effect in the person. So post-traumatic stress disorder or injury, it has all different kinds of side effects. But the difference between with the C and without the C is without the C, it is a single incident. It might be war, which it's more than one day. It's not
mm,
just doesn't have to be just one day, but it's a singular kind of thing. Whereas the C for complex, it's happened over a long period of time of multiple different kinds, or the same thing like pounding on your leg with a hammer for 20 years. That would, make a pretty big bruise and damage.
very true. And so you talk about and deal with both childhood trauma and adult trauma. So talk to us a little bit about that as far as what the differences are. I mean,
Well,
other than the obvious.
other than the obvious of the time frame, but people, they don't understand. I didn't understand even when I was dealing with it in my own life. But another word for childhood trauma is developmental trauma. And by using that word, it brings a little bit more understanding, because with childhood trauma or developmental trauma, a child is going through something that they don't even have the skills as a human being to have yet, because they are too young. They haven't developed that part of their life, of their thought process. I mean, they don't start doing multiplication tables till they're in third grade. Of course, there's geniuses that are exempt from that and all that, but savants and that. But the general rule, there's certain, progressive time frames that kids learn things. They generally learn to walk around this time. They generally learn to talk around this time, and the different processes in that development. But trauma happening at different times, it injures and inhibits the brain from completing certain processes. And it gets things stuck in there that make things go sideways inside of the person. They can't deal with it. And there's a whole myriad of what that all is.
Wow.
Whereas in adult trauma, it is traumatic and it affects you, and people get PTSD, and you can get CPTSD even as an adult. But you have a whole brain. It's like you have a whole brain, and a child does not have a whole brain. One picture that I got when I was being interviewed once, I really love this because it's easy to visualize. You're making cupcakes or muffins, if you like muffins better. And you put them in the little muffin cups and you put them in the oven, right? But what if you like dropped them before they got in the oven? You would have like splat all over the floor, right? But if you finished cooking them and you pulled them out and they fell on the floor, those cupcakes or muffins, they might be whole, they might be cracked, they might fall apart some, but the damage to that cupcake after it's been cooked is completely different than when it was just the batter.
Wow, that is like a really great explanation of, I mean, it's cupcakes, but it's a really great
Yeah.
explanation of that. So basically the childhood mind is a lot more, it's a lot.
Malleable.
Thank you. I was trying to think of a good word. Um and easier to damage.
Yes.
Is Yeah. Wow. Wow.
That's
That's
why it's during the childhood time when people develop things that they have now renamed it to DID, or dissociative identity disorder. When I was growing up, it was called multiple personality disorder, and they just locked you away for it.
mm,
There was a lot of things like schizophrenia and stuff. They just locked you away for it. You have these things, they just locked you away and threw you in the loony bin, where we have all this, and they called it that back then. Forgive me for those of you who might feel that that was disrespectful, but they did call it that back then. And it's not respectful to the person who's going through it. It's disrespectful because they have an injury. They have something that is not functioning properly. There should not be shame attached to it. That's why I
mm.
love the whole mental health thing that's going on, and emotional health. And they're bringing awareness to this and tools to deal with it. And it's so much different than when I was growing up. It's a different world in a very good way on those two things. So,
Wow. And then there's something that you mentioned called childhood emotional neglect.
yeah.
So, uh, so now I'm like, okay, well, I'm guessing that can cause trauma, or is that something different? Like, can you talk a bit about that?
That's another way that trauma takes place. It's
Okay.
There's child abuse, which people know what that is. There's a physical injury with child abuse. There's emotional abuse, which is, verbal or violent things emotionally, verbally, and that affects them mentally and emotionally. But childhood emotional neglect isn't something that happened. Child emotional neglect is something that needed to happen that didn't.
Mm,
So it's something that's missing. So a child growing up, they don't grow up going, well, I needed to be emotionally nurtured when I was 5, when I came home from kindergarten, and blah, 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 the situation. They have no idea. They just, I want my mommy and make me feel better kind of
mm,
thing. And if they don't get what they need, and every kid is different with what they need, it affects them. Yeah. And it doesn't
wow.
have to be perfect. It it's how big of a deal was it? Was it repetitive? Was it a one-off and the kid recovered from it? In fact, today I was just comforted by my daughter, because I was messed up when I got married, and I have 2 children, and I've talked with them about my trauma, and I've apologized to them for all the places where I could have messed them up, because I was terrified to have children. And I have
Mm,
children, and I blame it on God in a good way. Because I wasn't going to have kids, and God had a different idea. It's a whole story. It's in my book, Emerging with Wings. So I don't want to digress. But I've had conversations with my children because of this. And we had one this morning, my daughter and I. And my daughter is very strong. She's very independent. She's had her own difficulties growing up. I think everyone has been through some kind of trauma. But how much resilience they had in them can protect them from something that they can't just heal and get over simply by recognizing, dealing with it, and stuff like that.
Mm.
But we had this conversation this morning about, she stumbled over how to put it. She goes, just, I wanted to tell you this, but I'm so glad it came up in this organic way this morning. Because I've talked with my therapist about this. Um, that my trauma, me, the mom, the trauma that I went through and I was working on dealing with and healing of when I, was raising my kids. She said that I think that made me a better person because it made me stronger. And her therapist told her that because of her personality. And one of my primary motivations when I had my kids, if I did anything right, they were going to know they were loved. They would, that one thing, if I did that one thing right, I was going to do that. She said, I always knew I was loved no matter what was going on, no matter what was happening. But I remember certain things, and she felt that mom's having a hard time here. I'm going to just go and entertain myself, and she had no issue with that because all of the other things I had in place were enough.
Mm.
So she had enough, and that's what the whole thing is with childhood emotional neglect. They didn't get the nurture. They didn't get enough nurture for what they needed, and enough is relative. I've done a talk on this before because it's not just a flat thing.
Mm-hmm.
Enough is always related to whoever is doing the measuring. A picture that I came up with is, okay, I have a half a cup of sugar. You have a quarter cup measuring cup. So I have more than enough sugar for you. But if you have a 1 cup measuring cup, I don't have enough sugar for you. But in both of those situations, I have the same amount of sugar. So the enough or not enough is in what is necessary, what is needed. How much does a recipe call for whether or not you have enough? And that's what it is with childhood emotional neglect. Did the child get enough for what they needed? And my daughter had conveyed to me this morning that she had gotten enough.
Mm.
And so she is strong, and that it built resilience actually in her, which made her stronger. And I was like, wow, that's really awesome. Thank you for telling me that. And to have this opportunity so fresh to share this for you, parent who are listening, maybe you've fallen down. But if you focus on just loving your kid, and even if they're completely grown up now, go and talk to them after the fact, because you can still build that now, because it's never too late to deal with it as long as you're still breathing and alive.
Yes, absolutely. And love, speaking of, really seems to be the whole foundation of everything that you do.
Yes.
So let's talk about that for a moment, because in what you just said, I mean, honestly, to me, that explains why right there, because it seems like that can kind of compensate, even if there are things that happen. Sometimes we can't avoid trauma, depends on what it is.
Hmm.
Um, but it just explained about the role of love in healing trauma.
Well, it came to me in that understanding through the writing of my first book, Emerging with Wings, because the subtitle is A True Story of Lies, Pain, and the Love That Heals. Because I grew up feeling unloved, and I had that emotional neglect, and that just paved the way to make me, easy target for all the other things that happened to me. Some were circumstantial, some were at the hands of people. But I felt like I was not loved by God because of it was at the hands of people at church. My core trauma happened at the church, where the leaders of the church publicly rejected me in front of the entire church as a child. And I knew that injured me, and how God healed me was in layers, because that trauma went really deep, and it affected my perception of God, my relationship with God, my perception of myself, my value. It shot to the core that I didn't have the right to even exist, let alone have anyone love me. God threw me away, is what I believed, because, I
Mm.
was a kid, and, a kid, the people who are in charge, you put them in a position higher, because they're God to you, so to speak, because, you're this little thing, you know, and
Mm.
they were at the church. So even more so, I looked to them like that, and I didn't understand that. They didn't explain any of that either. It was all very adult, and I just didn't get it. And I came away just so wounded in that way, to
Mm.
not believe God loved me. In fact, I had unbelief that God loved me rather than a failure to believe. There was like deep rooted unbelief in that area. And I learned that because the Lord showed me. He took me through layers of healing of that. And chapter 9 in my book is called Bullseye, because of it was the enemy who just did layer after layer after layer to plant that lie so deep in the core. It was a bullseye, which the explanation of a bullseye is the highest achievement of success.
Mm.
So it's like smack dab in the center. You can't get any better than that.
Wow.
And it was through writing my book that the Lord started showing me that love, that it was the love and the healing all through my journey. Because the Lord, He really helped me write that book. I started reading that again before a speaking engagement not too long ago. And I just kept stopping in awe, going, man, God help me write this, because this is just too good. I don't even know. I couldn't have come up with this, It's like
Wow.
that's how I felt about it. But the book is written like a love story. There's a hero, a villain, and then the person going through the trauma and then emerging free at the end. And the hero is God, but his name in the book is the pursuer, pursuing like a suitor pursues someone who they love. And it's that love has been the force throughout my entire healing journey. And I have a book I give away at my website called Love's Manifesto,
Mm.
about that journey a little bit, because it took the Lord 35 years to fully convince me that He loved me no matter what. And that's a long time. And during the time He was doing that, I would attack myself, because why don't I believe this? And I saw Him doing things, and He's taking me through things, and He was reprogramming me and doing all kinds of things. Yet I felt like, why can't I believe this? What's
Mm.
wrong with me? And just the self-attacking was just so repetitive, and it went on for 35 years,
Wow.
until one morning when the breakthrough occurred. And I took out my phone and wrote a note in my phone, because I wanted to mark the day and the time that had taken place, that I felt the breakthrough had occurred. And I've had attacks since then, and yeah, I fully believe it. I'm fully convinced. Me all the time, no matter how bad I am, because I had been so programmed with earning at that same church, and through spiritual means through the enemy, that earning. And that's the direct opposite of the gospel. Yeah, we were saved
Mhm.
by grace through faith. And I knew the words, and I understood English, and I had it all very superficial, but the wound went so deep. And I know how miserable it feels to feel like you're unloved and no one can ever love you, and you can't love yourself.
Wow.
And I don't want people to feel that. And that lady on the internet who loves you just came about before the shutdown of the pandemic, because I started to do lives more, because I wanted to get my message out more about people, healing and love yourself from survive to thrive. And at first on my website, it was connecting people to the love that heals, because it was from my book. I put it out there, and I wasn't sure if I was doing anything after that, because I was scared to put it out there. I mean, this is my story, and I learned a lot about myself writing that book that I hadn't known before. So I'm sharing new stuff with you, and I don't know you. But it's like, so it's a transition and a morphing. It's a growth period. So it was
Mm-hmm.
connecting people to the love that heals, and then it was love yourself, etc., because etc. is and so on and so forth, because I wanted people to love themselves and so on and so forth kind of thing.
Yeah.
But people got lost in the etc. thing. So it's like, how do you just keep changing so that you can get better at conveying your message. And that just evolved. That lady on the internet who loves you, I was doing the lives, and the fear that was coming out with the pandemic was just heartbreaking to see. The
Mm-hmm.
fear, it was tangible, you could feel
Yeah.
it. And I know that love is what drives that out. So I'm like, I'm telling people they love them. I'm showing them, I'm going to tell you I love you, and I'm that lady. I'm here to tell you I love you. And it just kind of, it morphed into, I'm that lady on the internet who loves you. How can I tell you that? And I don't know you. Well, people say they hate you for no reason. I can love you for no reason. And
Awesome.
God loves me, so I can love you. I choose to love you. Love is a choice. God chose to love us, and He loves us all the time. And we need that. We need
Yes.
that. The fabric of our being is made up of love, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, who is love.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love that whole message. And in case you guys missed it, I want to bring it back around. She has a freebie on her website, and you said it's called the Love Manifesto, right?
Love's Manifesto. I
Love's
have it in
Manifesto.
audio and in print. So
Yeah, so you guys make sure you go and check that out definitely. But I love the whole message that you just gave, because that was a whole message that you just gave right now, and that is beautiful. That basically love does overcome, and that is in the word, and we I think we know that, but it is hard to get over that. When we've been hurt, and that hurt that you were talking about, people call that church hurt. It's a name that people kind of
actually,
put on it.
that's the trendy term right now, but there's
Yeah.
actually religious trauma, spiritual trauma, and church hurt, and those are three different things if you look at what they
Wow.
really are.
Okay. So that sounds like a whole nother
That's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother thing.
and but none of them can be good for us, our spirit, our soul, you know. So definitely love can conquer all of that. So I just applaud you for what you are doing, and that message that you are giving people and that you have out there, and showing people how to overcome that trauma through love. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, we hear that. We hear the words. We understand English. I like putting it that way because we can read something. Someone who just learns a new language. I have learned a few things in Spanish, not a whole lot, but because I've been to Guatemala a few times, and I can say a couple of things. But people talking to me, I'm like, I caught that word, and I caught that word, and I can understand. I can read it. If I look up the scriptures in Hebrew, because I took an interlinear thing once a long time ago. It's like I
Oh,
could
no.
read this and I could understand like the word, but you don't get comprehensive understanding. The best way to learn a language is through immersion, is what they say. You just need to go and live there. And
Mm-hmm.
that's through experience. And that's how we learn love, is by experiencing it. I can tell you I love you all day long, but if you don't feel it, you don't experience it, you walk away going, I don't believe you.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Beautiful and true. And true. Very true. So I wanted to talk a bit, because you talk, about, and you hit on it earlier, like some of the forms of mental health. They consider PTSD mental health condition, but you were kind of talking a bit about that as well. But is there a connection between mental health conditions or mental health and loving yourself?
I believe so. And there is between trauma and not. And then there's also those who have a mental health condition, and it's just simply biological, chemical as well. So I want to take it. I'm not a medical professional. This is not medical advice. My little disclaimer here, I'm not a doctor, but I always want to be careful to make room for people to be who they are. I'm not trying to qualify you or put you in a box, but if there's a possibility, it could be something that loving yourself, and you could, maybe you could get off of, maybe you're on 4 different medications, and if you got off one, would that be worth it?
Mm,
Or and if you went to a counselor because coaching isn't enough, and you could get off of 2 of your medications, would that be worth it?
right.
It's, maybe you get off them, maybe you don't get off them. I interviewed someone for my podcast recently, and she suffered DID, and she didn't start healing. She didn't go to therapy till she was 61. See, it's not too late.
Wow.
And she was on antidepressants and various different things. And she said that they don't heal it. I love how she put, they enable you to raise your children, but put
Mm,
it that way, because they give you certain power in that, but they're not a cure. They're a managing tool that make
mm,
you be able to manage that. And if you can, maybe it would be a bridge. I don't like people use the word crutch because then they make it sound like it's a bad thing. Whereas a bridge, it takes you from one place to another. Maybe you need it as a bridge. You can take it as a bridge until you deal with your trauma, and then maybe you can eventually get off of it. Or maybe you won't. But if
oh,
you cross the bridge, then you find out.
mm.
So I'm going to peddle hope is what I'm going to peddle. I'm going to peddle hope and love.
I actually think that's very important. And I was talking with someone else about this, about the fact that I think any sort of treatment that you get when you're experiencing any of these issues, whether it's some trauma, some form of PTSD, whether it's depression, anxiety, like any of these things, um, I believe that the treatment should be well rounded. And so, if in talking about that, I mean, yes, you can be on medication if you need to be on medication, but also what a friend of mine calls talk therapy, talk therapy. Um, also, you may just need to do things like meditation, and we had a young lady on talking about yoga therapy
Mm-hmm.
for trauma. So I think it's like a combination of things that you can do to really be able to
Oh, yeah.
deal with it and to you know do kind of that self care, but also everything else that you can do to help yourself.
Oh,
So is
definitely.
that
Because
yeah
stress exacerbates trauma. It exacerbates, mental health problems, emotional health problems, and nurture or love mitigates it. So those are your two things. You can, if you lower your stress through meditation, yoga, or whatever means that, you want to go about, then you can lower that. That's helping yourself. And if you
hmm
can love yourself, then you're adding that nurture in. And by healing trauma and that, then you can improve your relationships, which will also increase surrounding yourself with nurture by having better relationships. So there are things that you can do.
yeah, definitely. So I think one of the things that I'll take from that is definitely people should feel empowered
Mhm.
to be able to, be take some charge over their healing.
Yeah, take ownership of it. I was just writing about that
Yes.
today, that we can't control what happened to us in the past because we can't go back. And, tomorrow doesn't help us. We have today, and what someone else did to us, we can't control that. We can't control anyone else. We can only control ourselves. Only I can change my life. No one can do it for me. And we have to take ownership of where we are. There's a quote at the very beginning of my book about, you know, taking responsibility of exactly where I am gives me the power to go exactly where I want to go. I don't think I quoted that perfectly, but that the point remains the same, because if we don't take responsibility of where we are right now, I mean, that does two things, because responsibility and ownership are two different things. But by doing that for where we are right now, we're doing today. We're looking at today. So we're owning today and all those past choices we made. Other people did stuff, but we made choices too. We responded to whatever happened to us. We were a participant in the story. So, like Brene Brown talks about owning your story. own your story. Take ownership of your story. Take ownership of where you are right now, and look at it as a start space. And you can start from today and just, deal with the other things. I'm not saying forget everything, because there's a lot of things to deal with. But if you hold on to blame and excuses, you'll get stuck in the past. But if you'll grab a hold of today and start processing to move forward, you can get free from that stuff.
Wow. Great point. Great point. This has been awesome. And if you can believe 30 minutes has already already gone past, and you have shared some really great information for our listeners. I really appreciate that. Definitely worthwhile information. So I always like to end the show with asking my guests one or two things. I'll say one or two things that you really want to make sure that the audience remembers, that you can leave them with today. What would you say those would be?
I think I said them already, but I'll say them again, is you are loved. You matter, you are loved, and you have power. You have power to take ownership of your life. If you don't know how, you can reach out to me and I can help you. I have coaching. And you can take ownership of your emotions. I have lots of freebies at my website, actually. I have a whole tab, free resources. I have an emotional health journal for a 30-day emotional health journal. It's free. I have another one that you can get for the holidays as well, that to take ownership of your emotions, what you're feeling, and be intentional about it, instead of about it, because it's so important that we listen to our emotions. They're like little sign cards, and they're like little directions. We need, oh, what was that trying to tell me? And then we use our choice to choose what to do to respond. We don't let our emotions drive us, but they need to be part of the GPS.
Mm, great point. Okay, awesome. And I'll bring up your website, and you've written four books, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So you guys can find more information about the books. And you actually have a couple of websites. Which one is better to go to? Because you have the Victorious Souls, and then you have the one for your name, the
Yeah,
Danielle Bernock.
DanielleBernock.com. That
Yeah.
one has everything. You can get to Victorious Souls from DanielleBernock.com and vice versa. But DanielleBernock.com is the one that has all the free resources and additional resources. It has a whole media page where I've been on different podcasts and speaking things, and people can listen to that to hear me. It's like, I don't know if I want this lady to coach me. Well, watch my YouTube channel and listen to when I'm talking, and then you get a feel for who I am, because it's wise to do that. You don't just jump into coaching with someone. You need to see if it's a good fit.
And I'll put that in the chat for you guys as well, so you can pick up her website and go to that. Pick up her freebies and check her out. Her podcast that she does, all the information that she has on her website. I really thank you, Danielle. You have shared definitely a wealth of information, and you know, it's definitely important to love yourself. So
And
thank
to
you
know
for
you
that.
are loved.
And
So you who are
and
listening, I love you.
and she is that lady on the internet that loves you. Yes.
I am.
Thank you, Danielle.
Well, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you guys, it has been another great show. Thank you to my guest, Danielle, for a wonderful show today. We've heard a lot of great information from her. So we'll actually be taking a break for the Thanksgiving holiday. So we will not be airing on the fourth Friday. We will return on the second Friday of December. So be sure to join us then. And I believe that is December 9th. We'll be airing another show, same time, same place. Join us, and until then, you guys, thank you for joining us. We enjoyed having you. We definitely enjoyed our guest today. And we'll see you guys the next time. Stay boss.